17-year-old Maya had been signing to herself in the corner of the boardroom for weeks, fingers moving in silent conversations no one bothered to understand. The other executives saw her as the CEO's charity case, another foster kid he'd taken in out of guilt. But when the federal investigators stormed in that Tuesday morning, Maya stepped forward and signed something that made her guardian's face go white. She wasn't practicing random gestures. She'd been recording every illegal word spoken in that room, translating corruption into a language of truth that would bring down an empire. The girl they'd dismissed as damaged goods had been their salvation all along. Like this video if you believe the quietest voices often carry the most powerful truths. 3 months earlier, Maya Delacroix sat in the leather passenger seat of Jonathan Blackstone's Mercedes, her entire life compressed into a single black duffel bag. The manila folder on the dashboard bore her name in clinical block letters, thick, with the documentation of 7 failed foster placements. Each page told the same story: brilliant test scores, perfect behavior, and an impenetrable wall of silence that drove families to return her like a defective product. Jonathan had met her at the Blackstone Foundation's annual charity gala, where foster children were paraded before wealthy donors like living testimonials to tax-deductible generosity, while other kids performed rehearsed speeches about gratitude and second chances. Maya had stood in the corner, fingers moving in what the social workers dismissed as nervous fidgeting. Something about her stillness had pierced through Jonathan's carefully constructed emotional armor. "She hasn't spoken in 5 years," the social worker had explained, handing over the file. "Selective mutism following the car accident that killed her parents. She's incredibly intelligent. IQ tests put her in the gifted range, but she's been labeled difficult by every placement. The families expect progress, communication, emotional connection. Maya gives them silence." The Blackstone mansion felt more like a museum than a home, filled with expensive art and the echoes of footsteps on marble floors. Jonathan's housekeeper, Rosa Martinez, had been the only one to greet Maya with anything resembling warmth. While Jonathan awkwardly showed her to a bedroom that cost more than most people's cars, Rosa had knelt down to Maya's eye level and signed a simple "welcome home" in halting but genuine American Sign Language. Maya's eyes had widened in surprise. It was the first time in months that someone had attempted to communicate in her language rather than demanding she use theirs. Rosa's signing was imperfect, learned from online videos after Jonathan mentioned his new foster daughter's condition, but the effort meant everything. The first month had been a careful dance of boundaries and expectations. Jonathan worked 18-hour days, treating Maya's presence like a noble obligation to be managed rather than a relationship to be nurtured. He provided everything she could need: designer clothes, private tutoring, a tablet loaded with educational apps, while maintaining the emotional distance that had defined his entire adult life. Maya understood his discomfort. She'd lived with 6 other families who'd taken her in with grand plans for healing and connection, only to grow frustrated when she wouldn't perform the role of grateful, recovering orphan. The 7th family hadn't even waited for the official removal process. They'd driven her to the social services office themselves, explaining that her silence was disrupting the household dynamic. But there was something different about Jonathan Blackstone. He didn't push her to speak or demand emotional milestones. He simply included her in his routine, inviting her to join him for dinner, asking if she wanted to accompany him to the office, never pressuring her to respond. His acceptance of her silence felt like the first genuine gift she'd received in years. Maya's routine began with the morning board meetings at Blackstone Industries. Jonathan had initially suggested she might enjoy seeing his workplace, perhaps inspiring her toward a future in business. What he didn't realize was that Maya's presence in the corner of the conference room would become her window into a world of corporate corruption that existed just beneath the surface of respectability. She carried her sign language dictionary everywhere, a thick paperback book that had belonged to her mother, pages soft from years of use. To the executives who bothered to notice her at all, it looked like therapeutic homework. A damaged girl trying to maintain connection to a language she'd learned from parents who were no longer there to speak it with her. In reality, Maya used the dictionary as both camouflage and documentation. While her fingers moved through practice signs, Her eyes recorded every conversation, every document left carelessly on the conference table, every knowing look exchanged between executives who believed themselves beyond scrutiny. The margins of her dictionary became a coded record of criminal activity. Next to the entry for betrayal, she noted the date Victoria Sterling had met with Blackstone's main competitor. Beside deception, she recorded account numbers she'd glimpsed on financial documents. The word loyalty was surrounded by question marks and the names of executives who claimed to support Jonathan while secretly undermining him. Maya's selective mutism had taught her to observe with an intensity that speaking people rarely develop. She noticed the way Victoria's smile never reached her eyes when she looked at Jonathan. She saw how the CFO's hands shook when certain topics were discussed. She cataloged the micro-expressions that revealed guilt, fear, and conspiracy among people who believed their intentions were invisible. During one particularly tense meeting about a proposed merger, Maya watched Victoria lean forward with calculated concern, her manicured hand resting on Jonathan's arm as she spoke about protecting the company's interests. The gesture looked supportive, even intimate. But Maya caught the brief moment when Victoria's eyes flicked to her phone, checking for a message from someone Jonathan didn't know existed. Maya's fingers spelled out trust in sign language, but her mind was recording the timestamp and the content of the conversation. She'd learned to read lips from her years of silence, a skill that proved invaluable when executives stepped into hallways or dropped their voices for supposedly private discussions. The dictionary became her sanctuary and her weapon. In its pages, she found the vocabulary to name what she was witnessing: embezzlement, fraud, corporate espionage, betrayal. But she also found words that gave her hope: justice, truth, protection, family. Rosa noticed Maya's intense focus during these meetings, the way she would return home with her dictionary clutched tightly to her chest, fingers moving in agitated conversations with herself. When Rosa asked gentle questions in her improving sign language, Maya would only sign back, watching and waiting, her dark eyes holding secrets that were growing too heavy for a 17-year-old to carry alone. But Maya was learning that silence could be its own form of power. While the executives dismissed her as invisible, she was becoming the most dangerous person in the room, the one who saw everything and was finally preparing to speak. Victoria Sterling moved through the Blackstone Industries offices like a predator disguised as prey, beautiful, sophisticated, and utterly ruthless. As chief operating officer, she had earned her position through a combination of genuine talent and carefully calculated seduction, though only Maya seemed to recognize the calculation behind her charm. To Jonathan, Victoria represented everything he'd been missing in his sterile, work-obsessed life. She was brilliant in meetings, supportive of his vision, and patient with his awkward attempts at romance. When she suggested he consider foster care as a way to add meaning to his wealth, Jonathan had been touched by her compassion. When she'd stood beside him at the charity gala, her hand warm on his arm as they watched the foster children, he'd felt something he hadn't experienced since his parents' death: the possibility of family. Maya watched their courtship with the intensity of a wildlife photographer documenting a hunt. Victoria's affection was perfectly timed, her suggestions always framed as concern for Jonathan's well-being. She would lean into him during stressful meetings, her voice soft and reassuring as she offered solutions that inevitably strengthened her own position within the company. Her business cards were works of art, thick, cream-colored cardstock with elegant typography that spoke of old money and established power. What Maya discovered by accident was that Victoria's business cards were more than networking tools. During a meeting with international clients, Maya had watched Victoria discreetly insert a business card into the USB port of a conference room computer. The card was designed with a hidden circuit board that installed malware, allowing Victoria to access confidential files and communications. Maya's photographic memory cataloged every instance of Victoria's digital theft. She watched the older woman's fingers dance across her phone during supposedly casual conversations, uploading stolen data to encrypted servers. She noted the way Victoria would excuse herself during crucial strategy meetings, always returning with additional insights that came from illegally obtained competitor information. But perhaps most disturbing was Victoria's treatment of Maya herself. In Jonathan's presence, Victoria was nothing but supportive, praising his decision to provide a loving home for a special needs child. She would ruffle Maya's hair with practiced, maternal affection, speaking about her in the third person, as if Maya's silence meant she couldn't understand. In private, Victoria's mask slipped. Maya caught glimpses of cold calculation in her eyes, the way she would study Maya like a problem to be solved. Once, Maya had walked into Jonathan's office to find Victoria sitting at his desk, going through personal files. When Victoria noticed her, she'd smiled and said, "Just organizing some paperwork for your father." But her voice carried a warning that made Maya's skin crawl. Maya began to understand that Victoria saw her as a potential threat, not because she suspected Maya of intelligence, but because Maya's presence complicated Victoria's plans for Jonathan. Whatever Victoria was building toward, Maya's existence as Jonathan's daughter was an obstacle that needed to be managed or eliminated. Maya's technical skills had been honed through necessity rather than formal education. In her third foster home, she'd lived with a family whose teenage son was a computer programmer. During the 4 months she'd spent in their spare bedroom, Maya had absorbed everything she could about coding, networking, and digital security. When they'd returned her to social services claiming her silence was too disruptive for their household, Maya had taken with her a foundation in technology that would prove invaluable. The tablet Jonathan had given her was top of the line, supposedly for educational purposes. Maya had modified it within weeks, installing custom software that turned it into a sophisticated surveillance device. She'd learned to intercept wireless signals, decode encrypted communications, and trace digital footprints with the patience of someone who had spent years watching the world without being able to participate in it. Victoria's data transfers followed a pattern Maya had begun to recognize. Every Tuesday and Friday, usually during lunch hours when the office was less crowded, Victoria would connect to a private network that didn't appear on any of Blackstone Industries' official systems. Maya's tablet had detected these unauthorized connections and begun logging their destinations. The trail led to shell companies and offshore accounts that had no obvious connection to Blackstone Industries. Maya discovered that Victoria had been systematically copying proprietary research, client lists, and financial projections, and selling this information to competitors. The business cards embedded with malware were just one part of a larger espionage operation that had been running for over 2 years. Maya's investigation revealed that Victoria had positioned herself as Jonathan's romantic interest, specifically to gain access to his company's most sensitive information. Every intimate dinner, every weekend getaway, every moment of supposed vulnerability had been calculated to lower Jonathan's defenses and increase Victoria's access to corporate secrets. The most damaging discovery came when Maya traced Victoria's communications to a consortium of Blackstone's competitors who were coordinating a hostile takeover. Victoria wasn't just stealing information, she was actively working to destroy the company from within, timing her betrayal to coincide with Jonathan's complete emotional dependence on her. Maya's modified tablet had captured terabytes of evidence, encrypted communications outlining the takeover plan, financial records showing Victoria's payments from competitor companies, and most devastatingly, recorded conversations where Victoria laughed about Jonathan's naive trust in her. But Maya faced a crucial problem. How could she warn Jonathan without revealing her own surveillance activities? Her foster father was falling in love with a woman who was systematically dismantling his life's work, and Maya's silence, the very thing that had made her invisible enough to discover the truth, now prevented her from easily sharing what she'd learned. Rosa had begun to notice Maya's increasing agitation. The teenager would return from the office with her tablet clutched protectively to her chest, fingers moving in frantic sign language conversations with herself. When Rosa asked what was wrong, Maya could only sign danger and father her, dark eyes pleading for understanding. Maya realized she was racing against time. Victoria's communications suggested the final phase of her plan was approaching, a moment when Jonathan would be forced to choose between his company and his heart, not knowing that the woman he loved was the architect of his destruction. Maya's hands trembled as she prepared the emergency flash drive, copying the most damning evidence of Victoria's betrayal onto the small device. She'd spent weeks building her case, documenting every instance of corporate espionage, every stolen file, every communication with Blackstone's competitors. Now she faced the impossible task of communicating this information to Jonathan without revealing the extent of her own surveillance activities. The family dinner that evening felt like a performance staged for her benefit. Victoria had arrived, with flowers for Rosa and a new sign language book for Maya, playing the role of caring stepmother-to-be with Academy Award precision. She complimented the meal, asked about Maya's day, and spoke about the importance of communication in families. All while her phone buzzed with encrypted messages from the consortium planning Jonathan's destruction. Maya watched Jonathan's face as he looked at Victoria, seeing the genuine affection and trust that made him vulnerable to manipulation. When Victoria reached across the table to squeeze his hand, mentioning how much she looked forward to their future together, Maya felt something break inside her chest. She began signing frantically, her fingers forming words that she hoped would convey the danger surrounding them. Trust, she signed, then shook her head violently. Betrayal, lies, danger to father. Jonathan paused in his conversation with Victoria, noticing Maya's agitation. What is it, sweetheart? Are you okay? Maya's frustration mounted as she realized how her desperate attempts at communication appeared to others. Victoria was watching her with sharp eyes, her smile never wavering, even as she calculated whether Maya might pose a threat to her plans. She's been having some behavioral issues lately, Victoria said smoothly, her voice dripping with false concern. The trauma from her parents' death can resurface in unexpected ways. Perhaps she needs to see a therapist who specializes in selective mutism. Maya's hand stilled, recognizing the subtle threat in Victoria's words. She was being dismissed as mentally unstable, her attempts at warning Jonathan reframed as symptoms of psychological distress. The flash drive in her pocket felt like a lead weight, containing evidence that could save Jonathan's company and possibly his life, but which she had no way to present without risking her own credibility. Jonathan reached across the table to take Maya's hands, his touch gentle but concerned. Maya, you know you can tell me anything, right? I want to help you, but I need to understand what's wrong. Maya looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, the genuine care that Victoria was exploiting. She pulled her hands free and signed one word with desperate intensity. Soon, Victoria's smile grew sharper, and Maya realized she'd just declared war on the most dangerous person in the room. Rosa Martinez had been watching Victoria Sterling with the intuition of someone who'd spent 60 years learning to read people's true intentions. As the Blackstone family's housekeeper, she'd witnessed enough wealthy predators to recognize the signs, the calculated charm, the perfectly timed gestures of affection. The way Victoria's eyes would go cold when she thought no one was looking. But Rosa had also been watching Maya, and she'd seen something that everyone else missed. The girl wasn't just practicing sign language during those board meetings. She was documenting, recording, building a case with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned to survive by paying attention to details others ignored. Rosa's own story of survival had taught her to trust her instincts. She'd immigrated to the United States 30 years ago, fleeing an abusive marriage and arriving with nothing but her infant daughter and an unshakable faith in divine protection. She'd worked her way up from cleaning office buildings at night to managing households for wealthy families, always watching, always learning, always protecting the vulnerable people who crossed her path. Maya had become her newest mission, though Rosa suspected the relationship was more reciprocal than anyone realized. The prayer card she kept in her apron pocket had become their secret communication system, a holy image of St. Gabriel, patron saint of messengers, with tiny penciled notes in the margins that only Maya could decode. She takes this computer at night, Rosa wrote in Spanish, her handwriting nearly microscopic. I saw her in his office when she thought I was sleeping. Maya's response came the next morning, written in equally small letters. I know. I have proof. Need to show father. Rosa understood the impossibility of Maya's situation. The girl had evidence of Victoria's betrayal, but her silence made her vulnerable to being dismissed as mentally unstable. Rosa had heard Victoria's subtle suggestions about therapy and residential treatment, recognizing them as calculated attempts to isolate Maya from Jonathan. They began meeting in the kitchen after Jonathan left for work, Rosa's basic sign language improving daily as Maya taught her more complex concepts. Maya showed Rosa screenshots from her modified tablet, pointing out patterns in Victoria's data transfers and communications with competitor companies. "Mia," Rosa signed carefully, "your father loves you. He will listen." Maya's response was swift and desperate. "He loves her more. She will say I'm sick, imagining things. Need proof he cannot ignore." Rosa studied the evidence Maya had compiled. Her understanding of corporate espionage limited, but her recognition of betrayal absolute. She'd seen enough manipulative people to know that Victoria's greatest strength was her ability to make others doubt their own perceptions. Maya needed an ally who could speak for her, someone Jonathan trusted who couldn't be dismissed as traumatized or delusional. "I will help," Rosa signed, her weathered hands moving with increasing confidence. "But we must be careful. She is dangerous." Maya nodded, pulling out her emergency flash drive. She handed it to Rosa with trembling fingers, finally trusting another person with the evidence that could save her family. Together, they began planning for the confrontation that would change everything. The emergency board meeting was called for a Tuesday morning, which Maya immediately recognized as significant. Victoria always scheduled her most important data transfers on Tuesdays. As she took her usual position in the corner of the conference room, Maya's modified tablet was already detecting unusual network activity from Victoria's devices. Jonathan looked haggard, his usually pristine appearance showing signs of stress that had been building for weeks. He'd been working 18-hour days, trying to navigate a series of financial pressures that seemed to appear from nowhere. What he didn't know was that many of these pressures had been artificially created by Victoria's systematic sabotage of key client relationships and strategic partnerships. Victoria entered the room with an air of grim determination, carrying a leather portfolio that she placed ceremoniously on the conference table. "I've been working around the clock to find a solution to our current crisis," she announced, her voice heavy with manufactured regret. "What I'm about to propose isn't what any of us wanted, but it may be our only option for survival." Maya watched the other executives' faces as Victoria outlined the supposed financial emergency. Several of them looked genuinely surprised, which confirmed Maya's suspicion that Victoria had been manipulating information to create an artificial crisis. The CFO's hands shook as he reviewed documents that painted Blackstone Industries as being on the verge of bankruptcy. "Meridian Global has offered to acquire us," Victoria continued, opening her portfolio to reveal a stack of official-looking documents. "The terms are challenging, but they've agreed to retain most of our workforce and maintain our corporate identity. The alternative is complete dissolution within 6 months." Maya's tablet detected that Victoria's portfolio contained more than just paper documents. Hidden within the leather binding was a sophisticated transmitter, actively uploading data to external servers even as Victoria spoke. Maya realized that Victoria was live-streaming this meeting to her co-conspirators, allowing them to monitor Jonathan's reactions and adjust their strategy in real time. Jonathan's hand shook as he reached for the acquisition documents. Maya could see the devastation in his eyes. This company was his life's work, built from the foundation his parents had laid decades ago. The thought of surrendering it to strangers was destroying him, but Victoria's manufactured crisis had been designed to leave him no choice. "I know this is difficult," Victoria said, moving to stand behind Jonathan's chair, her hands resting on his shoulders in a gesture that looked supportive but felt predatory. "But sometimes we have to make sacrifices to protect the people we love." Maya watched Victoria's fingers tighten on Jonathan's shoulders, and she realized this was the moment she'd been preparing for. The acquisition documents were forgeries, designed to transfer control of Blackstone Industries to a shell company that Victoria and her co-conspirators controlled. Jonathan was about to sign away his company to the very people who had been systematically destroying it. Maya's internal struggle reached its breaking point as she watched Jonathan lift his pen. She'd spent 5 years protecting herself through silence, but now that same silence was about to cost her the only family she'd ever known. The man who had given her a home, who had accepted her without demanding she change, was about to be destroyed by the woman he loved. Maya looked at Rosa, who was standing in the doorway, with a serving tray, her eyes wide with understanding. They both knew that this was the moment they'd been preparing for, the moment when Maya would have to choose between her protective silence and her family's survival. The federal investigators burst through the conference room doors like a scene from a crime drama, their badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Maya had been tracking their approach through her tablet, which had detected their communication frequencies as they coordinated their raid on Blackstone Industries. She'd known they were coming because she'd been the one to contact them, sending anonymous tips with carefully selected evidence that would force them to investigate Victoria's activities. Federal Bureau of Investigation, the lead agent announced, his voice cutting through the shocked silence of the boardroom. We have a warrant to search these premises and seize all electronic devices in connection with an ongoing investigation into corporate espionage. Victoria's face went pale, her carefully constructed mask of concern cracking as she realized the scope of the investigation. The acquisition documents scattered across the table as she stepped back from Jonathan, her mind racing to calculate her chances of escape. Maya stood slowly from her corner, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. She'd rehearsed this moment in her mind hundreds of times, but now that it was happening, her body felt disconnected from her intentions. Her modified tablet was recording everything, preserving what she knew would be the most important conversation of her life. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The room fell silent. Jonathan's face went white as he stared at Maya, his eyes wide with shock. In 5 years of fostering her, he'd never heard her speak a single word aloud. Rosa dropped her serving tray, the crash of dishes echoing through the silence. "Excuse me," Maya repeated, her voice growing stronger. "I have information about this case." The lead FBI agent turned to her, his expression professional but curious. "And you are?" "Maya Delacruz," she said, her hands beginning to move in sign language, even as she spoke. "I'm Mr. Blackstone's foster daughter. I've been documenting illegal activities in this company for 3 months. Victoria's voice cut through the room like a blade. "She's mentally ill," she said desperately. "Selective mutism, severe trauma from her parents' death. She hasn't spoken in years. She's clearly having some kind of breakdown." Maya turned to face Victoria directly, her dark eyes steady and determined. "I've been recording you," she said, her voice carrying a strength that surprised even her. "Every meeting, every data transfer, every conversation with your co-conspirators. I know about the shell companies, the stolen client lists, the coordinated attacks on our partnerships. I know about Meridian Global and the consortium planning to destroy this company." She pulled out her tablet and her emergency flash drive, her hands surprisingly steady, despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. "I have 3 months of evidence documenting systematic corporate espionage, including communications between Victoria Sterling and representatives of our competitors. She's been selling our proprietary information and sabotaging our business relationships to create an artificial crisis." Jonathan stood slowly, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and growing horror. "Maya ... you've been... You can ... I've always been able to speak," Maya said, her voice gentling as she looked at him. "I chose silence because it felt safer. But you gave me a family worth protecting, and I couldn't stay silent while she destroyed it." Maya turned back to the FBI agents, switching between spoken English and sign language as she detailed her evidence. "The acquisition documents on the table are forgeries. Victoria's portfolio contains a transmitter that's been live streaming this meeting to external servers. Her business cards contain malware designed to steal confidential information from client computers." Victoria made a sudden move toward the door, but 2 agents blocked her path. "Victoria Sterling," the lead agent said, "you're under arrest for corporate espionage, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft of trade secrets." As they read Victoria her rights, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years. Power of her own voice, finally used to protect the people she loved. Maya's complete evidence file spread across the conference table like a damning tapestry of betrayal. FBI forensic analysts worked alongside Maya, their sophisticated equipment confirming what her modified tablet had been documenting for months. The scope of Victoria's espionage network was staggering, a coordinated attack on Blackstone Industries that had been years in the making. The initial approach was through social media. Maya explained to the federal agents, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. Victoria researched Jonathan's psychological profile, his history of emotional isolation, his guilt over his parents' death. She designed their chance meeting at the charity gala to exploit his specific vulnerabilities. The evidence showed that Victoria had been feeding Jonathan's competitors information about every major decision, every strategic initiative, every weakness in Blackstone's business model. The recent financial crisis that had pushed Jonathan toward the acquisition had been entirely manufactured. Series of coordinated attacks on key partnerships and client relationships that Victoria had orchestrated from within. She's been selling our research to pharmaceutical companies. Maya continued, pointing to encrypted communications on her tablet. Our breakthrough in sustainable manufacturing processes has been replicated by 3 different competitors, all of whom received the information through Victoria's network. Jonathan sat in stunned silence, his world reframing itself around the reality of Maya's revelations. The woman he'd been planning to marry, the person he'd trusted with his heart and his company, had been systematically destroying everything he'd built. But perhaps more shocking was the realization that Maya, the silent, damaged girl he'd taken in out of obligation, had been protecting him all along. Victoria's attempts at manipulation continued even as federal agents cataloged her crimes. She's delusional, Victoria insisted, her voice taking on a desperate edge. 5 years of selective mutism, severe psychological trauma she's projecting, her own paranoid fantasies onto normal business relationships. Jonathan, you know me. You know I love you. Maya's response was to hand the lead FBI agent an audio recording device. I recorded your conversation with Marcus Chun from Meridian Global last Thursday, she said quietly. The one where you laughed about Jonathan's pathetic trust and discussed how to maximize the company's value before the acquisition. The color drained from Victoria's face as her own voice played back through the conference room speakers, her carefully constructed facade crumbling in real time. The recording captured her genuine personality, cold, calculating, contemptuous, of the man she'd been manipulating. The acquisition documents are forgeries, Maya continued, her methodical presentation of evidence demonstrating an intelligence that had been hiding behind years of silence. Victoria and her co-conspirators planned to strip Blackstone Industries of its assets, then dissolve the company within 18 months. Jonathan would have been left with nothing. As federal agents escorted Victoria from the building, she turned back to stare at Maya with undisguised hatred. You have no idea what you've done, she hissed. He'll never trust anyone again. You've destroyed his ability to love. Maya met her gaze steadily. I've given him the chance to love someone who deserves it. The Blackstone mansion felt different in the days following Victoria's arrest, quieter, but also somehow more honest. Jonathan moved through the rooms like a man learning to walk again, his entire understanding of the past 2 years rewritten by Maya's revelations. A federal investigation had confirmed every detail of her evidence, revealing the full scope of Victoria's betrayal and the narrow margin by which Blackstone Industries had escaped complete destruction. Maya found Jonathan's letter on her breakfast plate 3 days after the arrests, his handwriting shaky but determined. The pages were filled with words he'd never been able to speak aloud, apologies for dismissing her attempts at communication, gratitude for her protection, and a confession of his own failures as a father and guardian. I don't know how to forgive myself, he'd written. You tried to warn me, and I was so blinded by my own loneliness that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. You saved my company, but more importantly, you saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. I don't deserve your protection, but I'm grateful for it every day. Maya carried the letter to his office, where she found him staring out the window at the garden Rosa had been tending. His desk was covered with sign language books and online course materials. His computer opened to video lessons in American Sign Language. The sight of him, this powerful, successful man struggling to learn her language, broke something open in her chest. You don't need to learn sign language for me, she said softly, her voice still feeling strange after 5 years of silence. I can speak now. Jonathan turned, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and guilt. I want to learn, he said. I want to be able to communicate with you in the language you chose, not just the one that's convenient for me. I want to understand how you see the world. Maya sat across from him, her hands automatically moving into sign language as she spoke. I chose silence because it felt safer. After my parents died, speaking felt like inviting more pain. But you gave me something worth protecting, and that made me strong enough to speak again. I failed you, Jonathan said, his voice breaking. I brought a predator into our home. I trusted her over you. You didn't fail me, Maya replied, her hands signing even as she spoke. You gave me time to heal. You didn't push me to be someone I wasn't ready to be. And when I was ready to speak, you listened. Jonathan reached across the desk to take her hands, his touch gentle and reverent. I'm sorry I couldn't see you, he whispered. I'm sorry it took almost losing everything to understand what I had. Maya squeezed his hands, finally feeling safe enough to trust the love she saw in his eyes. The practice cards scattered across the kitchen table represented more than language. Learning, they were Jonathan's daily commitment to understanding Maya's world. Each morning before work, he would sit with her and Rosa, his powerful hands, fumbling through basic signs while Maya patiently corrected his finger positions and encouraged his progress. Trust, Jonathan signed carefully, his movements still awkward but improving. Maya nodded approvingly, then showed him the subtle differences between trust and faith, explaining how the same concept could carry different emotional weights depending on the context. Rosa watched their lessons with maternal satisfaction, her own signing now fluent enough to serve as translator when Jonathan's vocabulary failed him. The three of them had formed an unlikely family unit, bonded by shared trauma and mutual protection. Maya had saved Jonathan's company, but Rosa had saved them both by recognizing Maya's intelligence and creating space for her unique form of communication. The federal investigation had revealed the full scope of Victoria's network's 17 companies compromised, over $200 million in stolen intellectual property, and a coordinated attack on American technological innovation that had been orchestrated by foreign competitors. Maya's evidence had been the key that unlocked the entire conspiracy, her patient documentation providing the proof that federal agencies had been seeking for over 3 years. You're a hero, Jonathan signed during one of their morning sessions, his hands moving with increasing confidence. Maya shook her head, her response combining sign language with spoken words. I'm just someone who learned to pay attention. Invisible people see things that others miss. Their relationship was rebuilding itself on a foundation of genuine understanding rather than obligation. Jonathan had initially taken Maya in as a charitable act, a way to fill the emptiness in his life with something meaningful. Now he was learning to see her as a complete person, brilliant, observant, protective, and capable of love that was both fierce and gentle. Maya had begun attending therapy sessions with Dr. Sarah Chun, a psychologist who specialized in trauma and selective mutism. The sessions were helping her understand that her 5 years of silence hadn't been weakness. They'd been adaptation, a way of surviving in a world that had become unpredictable and dangerous after her parents' death. Selective mutism often develops as a response to trauma, Dr. Chon explained to Jonathan during a family session. Maya's silence wasn't a rejection of communication, it was a form of protection. She needed to feel safe enough to speak, and that safety came from knowing she was truly seen and valued. Maya's relationship with Jonathan had evolved from obligation to genuine partnership. He included her in business decisions, asking for her observations about potential clients and partners, her ability to read people's true. Victoria's trial became a landmark case in corporate espionage law, with Maya's evidence serving as the foundation for charges that would reshape how federal agencies investigated international business crimes. The courtroom was packed with representatives from dozens of companies that had been affected by Victoria's network, their executives eager to see justice served for years of systematic theft. Maya testified via video link with a certified ASL interpreter, her hands moving with calm precision as she detailed the months of surveillance that had uncovered Victoria's crimes. The defense attorneys attempted to portray her as an unreliable witness, a traumatized teenager whose selective mutism indicated mental instability. But Maya's evidence spoke for itself. Thousands of hours of recorded conversations, documented financial transactions, and a digital trail that conclusively proved Victoria's guilt. The defendant exploited Mr. Blackstone's emotional vulnerability, To gain access to proprietary information, Maya signed her testimony translated simultaneously for the court. She studied his psychological profile, identified his fears and insecurities, and designed a relationship specifically to exploit those weaknesses. Victoria's defense crumbled as Maya methodically presented evidence of premeditation and international coordination. The prosecution revealed that Victoria had been recruited by foreign intelligence services while still in college. Her entire corporate career, designed as a long-term infiltration operation targeting American technological innovation. During the trial's most dramatic moment, prosecutors played the recording. Maya had captured of Victoria, laughing about Jonathan's pathetic trust and describing him as the perfect mark for emotional manipulation. The courtroom fell silent as Victoria's true voice, cold, calculating, contemptuous, filled the space where she'd been pretending to be a victim of circumstance. Victoria was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, but her attempts at manipulation didn't end with her conviction. Maya began receiving letters in prison, carefully crafted messages that alternated between apology and subtle threat. Victoria wrote about the misunderstanding that had led to her arrest, suggesting that Maya had misinterpreted normal business activities as criminal behavior. "I know you meant well," one letter read, "but your inexperience with corporate relationships led you to see conspiracy where there was only competition. I hope you can forgive yourself for the damage your accusations have caused." Maya showed the letters to Dr. Chun, who recognized them as continued attempts at psychological manipulation. "She's trying to make you doubt your own perceptions," Dr. Chun explained. "This is a classic technique used by abusers, making their victims question reality even after the abuse has been exposed." Maya's response was to donate the letters to federal investigators studying international espionage techniques, even from prison. Victoria was providing evidence of the psychological tactics used by foreign intelligence services to manipulate American citizens. Maya's college application essay became a meditation on the relationship between silence and strength, a piece of writing that transformed her traumatic experience into a blueprint for resilience. She wrote about the 5 years when speaking felt impossible, describing how that silence had taught her to observe with an intensity that most people never developed. "Selective mutism is often misunderstood as a choice," she wrote, "but for me, it was a form of protection, a way of creating safety in a world that had become unpredictable and dangerous. What I learned during those years of silence was that communication takes many forms, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is listen." Her essay described the investigation that had saved Blackstone Industries, but focused on the deeper lesson about the value of overlooked perspectives. In a world that prizes quick responses and confident opinions, there's immense power in being the person who watches, who notices patterns that others miss, who sees the truth that everyone else is too busy to observe. College admissions officers across the country were captivated by Maya's unique voice and perspective. Her academic record was exemplary. Years of advanced tutoring had given her knowledge equivalent to multiple AP courses, but it was her personal story that set her apart from thousands of other high-achieving applicants. Jonathan had initially worried that Maya might want to attend college far from home, seeking independence after years of being seen as damaged or dependent. Instead, she chose to stay close to the rebuilt family, accepting a full scholarship to study forensic psychology at a nearby university with a renowned program in trauma research. "I want to understand how people survive impossible situations," Maya explained during her admissions interview, her hands moving in sign language as she spoke. "I want to help other survivors recognize that their adaptations, even the ones that seem like disabilities, might actually be forms of strength." The Blackstone Foundation had undergone its own transformation following Victoria's arrest. What had begun as a generic charity for wealthy donors had evolved into a specialized organization focused on supporting foster children with communication differences. Maya's story had inspired other teenagers with selective mutism, autism, and various forms of trauma-related silence to recognize their own potential for observation and analysis. Maya began speaking at foster care training sessions, helping social workers and potential families understand that silence didn't indicate intellectual disability or emotional disconnection. Her presentations combined spoken English with sign language, demonstrating how multiple forms of communication could coexist and complement each other. Every child who comes into foster care has survived something that would destroy many adults, she would tell her audiences. Their coping mechanisms including silence represent incredible strength and intelligence. Our job isn't to fix them or make them normal. Our job is to create safety so they can choose their own forms of healing and communication. Jonathan attended every presentation, his own signing now fluent enough that he could serve as Maya's ASL interpreter when needed. Their partnership had evolved from guardian and ward to true collaborators, working together to transform their shared trauma into a force for protecting other vulnerable children. Maya's support group for teens with selective mutism met every Saturday afternoon in the Blackstone Foundation's Community Center, a space designed specifically for young people who communicated in ways that traditional therapy often failed to accommodate. The handbook she'd created drew from her own experience, as well as extensive research into trauma-informed care and alternative communication methods. Silence isn't the absence of communication, the handbook began. It's a different form of language, one that speaks through observation, through presence, through the careful choice of when and how to engage with the world. Each session began with what Maya called communication choice time, where participants could interact through sign language, written notes, art, or simply by being present in the space. Some teens were working through trauma, similar to Maya's car accidents, family violence, sudden loss, while others had developed selective mutism in response to bullying, learning differences, or social anxiety. Maya had learned to recognize the signs of teenagers who were carrying dangerous secrets, just as she had carried the knowledge of Victoria's betrayal. During one session, a 15-year-old named David began drawing increasingly violent images, his artwork revealing patterns that reminded Maya of her own desperate attempts to communicate about corporate espionage. Working with Dr. Chun, Maya developed a protocol for helping teens safely disclose information about abuse, neglect, or other dangerous situations. The support group became a model for trauma-informed youth services, demonstrating how alternative communication methods could help survivors find their voices without being forced into traditional therapeutic models that didn't fit their needs. Maya has created something unprecedented, Dr. Chun explained to a conference of child psychologists. She's developed a peer support model that recognizes selective mutism not as a disorder to be cured, but as a valid form of communication that can coexist with other forms of expression. The support group's success attracted attention from researchers studying resilience and post-traumatic growth. Maya found herself collaborating with university professors and medical professionals, her insights helping to reshape how the mental health community understood trauma responses in adolescence. Jonathan supported Maya's advocacy work by providing resources and funding for her programs, but he was careful to let her maintain ownership of her mission. Their relationship had taught him that true support meant creating space for others to find their own forms of strength rather than imposing external expectations for healing or communication. I used to think that love meant helping people become who I thought they should be, Jonathan reflected during one of their evening conversations. Maya taught me that love means creating safety for people to become who they actually are. Maya's handbook became required reading for foster care agencies across 3 states. Its practical strategies helping social workers and families understand that silent children weren't necessarily suffering. Children they might be observing, protecting, or simply communicating in ways that required more patience and creativity to understand. The teenagers in Maya's support group learned to see their selective mutism as one tool among many for navigating a complex world, rather than as a limitation that defined their entire identity. Maya's support group for teens with selective mutism met every Saturday afternoon in the Blackstone Foundation's Community Center, a space designed specifically for young people who communicated in ways that traditional therapy often failed to accommodate. The handbook she'd created drew from her own experience, as well as extensive research into trauma-informed care and alternative communication methods. Silence isn't the absence of communication, the handbook began. It's a different form of language, one that speaks through observation, through presence, through the careful choice of when and how to engage with the world. Each session began with what Maya called communication choice time, where participants could interact through sign language, written notes, art, or simply by being present in the space. Some teens were working through trauma similar to Maya's car accidents, family violence, sudden loss, while others had developed selective mutism in response to bullying, learning differences, or social anxiety. Maya had learned to recognize the signs of teenagers who were carrying dangerous secrets, just as she had carried the knowledge of Victoria's betrayal. During one session, a 15-year-old named David began drawing increasingly violent images, his artwork revealing patterns that reminded Maya of her own desperate attempts to communicate about corporate espionage. Working with Dr. Chon, Maya developed a protocol for helping teens safely disclose information about abuse, neglect, or other dangerous situations. The support group became a model for trauma-informed youth services, demonstrating how alternative communication methods could help survivors find their voices without being forced into traditional therapeutic models that didn't fit their needs. Maya has created something unprecedented, Dr. Chan explained to a conference of child psychologists. She's developed a peer support model that recognizes selective mutism not as a disorder to be cured, but as a valid form of communication that can coexist with other forms of expression. The support group's success attracted attention from researchers studying resilience and post-traumatic growth. Maya found herself collaborating with university professors and medical professionals, her insights helping to reshape how the mental health community understood trauma responses in adolescence. Jonathan supported Maya's advocacy work by providing resources and funding for her programs, but he was careful to let her maintain ownership of her mission. Their relationship had taught him that true support meant creating space for others to find their own forms of strength rather than imposing external expectations for healing or communication. I used to think that love meant helping people become who I thought they should be, Jonathan reflected during one of their evening conversations. Maya taught me that love means creating safety for people to become who they actually are. Maya's handbook became required reading for foster care agencies across 3 states. Its practical strategies helping social workers and families understand that silent children weren't necessarily suffering. Children they might be observing, protecting, or simply communicating in ways that required more patience and creativity to understand. The teenagers in Maya's support group learned to see their selective mutism as one tool among many for navigating a complex world, rather than as a limitation that defined their entire identity. Maya and Jonathan established a foundation for foster children with communication challenges, creating safe spaces where different forms of communication were valued and nurtured. The charter documents bore both their signatures, representing a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than obligation or charity. They created programs that revolutionized how social services approach children with selective mutism, autism spectrum disorders, and trauma-related communication differences. Maya trained social workers and foster families in recognizing the intelligence behind silence, helping them understand that nonverbal children weren't necessarily damaged or delayed. They might be processing, protecting, or simply communicating in ways that required more patience and creativity to decode. Traditional therapeutic models often focus on making children speak, Maya explained during a training session for foster care agencies. But what if we focused instead on creating environments where children feel safe enough to choose their own forms of communication? What if we valued observation and listening as much as we value speaking? Victoria's former crimes became case studies in corporate vulnerability, with Maya consulting for businesses on how to identify and prevent insider threats. Her unique perspective, someone who had learned to observe without being observed, made her invaluable in helping companies recognize the warning signs of internal sabotage. Maya sees patterns that others miss because she learned to watch without judgment, explained Dr. Chun during a conference on corporate security. Her experience with selective mutism taught her to process information differently, to notice inconsistencies and behavioral changes that might indicate deception or manipulation. The foundation's success attracted international attention, with delegations from other countries visiting to study their trauma-informed approach to foster care. Maya's story had become a model for how resilience could emerge from the most challenging circumstances, inspiring policy changes in child welfare systems across multiple states. Jonathan's business acumen, combined with Maya's psychological insights, created programs that were both emotionally supportive and practically effective. They developed screening tools to help social workers identify children who might be carrying dangerous secrets, and created protocols for safely encouraging disclosure without re-traumatizing vulnerable young people. "We're not trying to fix these children," Jonathan would explain to potential donors and collaborators. "We're trying to create environments where their existing strengths can flourish." Maya taught me that what looks like a disability might actually be a different form of ability. Maya's advocacy work had transformed her from a silent observer into a powerful voice for overlooked populations. But she never forgot the lessons of her years of silence, the value of listening deeply, watching carefully, and speaking only when her words could create positive change. The Foundation's motto, printed on all their materials, reflected this philosophy. Every voice matters, regardless of how it chooses to speak. 5 years later, Maya stood in the same garden where Rosa had once tended flowers, while worrying about the silent girl who had arrived with nothing but trauma and a duffel bag. Now 22 and preparing to marry David, a former support group member who had found his own voice through art therapy, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her from selective mutism to advocacy, leadership. Her wedding ring was simple but meaningful, a band engraved with "Seen, Heard, Loved" in Braille, representing her commitment to honoring all forms of communication. David's ring bore the same inscription in sign language, their jewelry serving as daily reminders that love meant truly seeing and accepting each other's unique ways of expressing themselves. Jonathan would walk her down the aisle in a ceremony that accommodated multiple forms of communication: spoken vows, signed promises, and artistic representations of their commitment. The wedding guests included teenagers from Maya support groups, federal agents who had become friends, and foster families who had learned to value different forms of strength. When I first met Maya, I thought love meant providing for someone's physical needs, Jonathan reflected during his father of the bride speech, his hands moving in fluent sign language as he spoke. "I thought that if I gave her a safe home and educational opportunities, I would have fulfilled my obligation as a foster parent. What Maya taught me is that love means creating space for someone to become who they actually are, not who you think they should be." Maya's work as a victim advocate had expanded beyond foster care into corporate consulting and federal law enforcement training. Her unique combination of psychological insight and practical experience made her invaluable in helping organizations recognize and respond to insider threats, manipulation, and various forms of institutional abuse. She had never forgotten the lesson of her years with Victoria, that the most dangerous people often appeared the most charming, and that protection sometimes required the courage to speak uncomfortable truths. Her advocacy had helped prevent dozens of cases of corporate espionage, while her therapeutic work had assisted hundreds of children in finding their own forms of voice and agency. The investigation that saved Blackstone Industries was never really about corporate espionage. Maya explained during her final presentation before taking a temporary leave for her honeymoon. "It was about learning to trust my own perceptions, to value what I saw even when others dismissed it, and to find the courage to speak when my voice was needed most." As she prepared to start her own family, Maya carried with her the knowledge that silence and speech were both forms of power, that observation and action could coexist, and that the most profound changes often came from the quietest voices finally choosing to be heard. The girl who had once been invisible to everyone around her had become a force for making other overlooked people visible. Her final message to the world was both simple and profound: who finally saw you when you felt invisible? And now, who are you learning to see? Share this story if you believe that every voice matters, regardless of how it chooses to speak.